There are about 4 million podcasts out there right now, but only about 400,000 of them are active. And if you told me early on, during when the internet was young and websites were just starting to become a thing, that I could have a website, one of the first 400,000 websites, I would definitely take that. I feel the same way about podcasting. I feel that even though there are so many, and it seems like so many, how many websites are there now? Billions, right? And so if you could have one of the first podcasts, even one of the first 400,000, I still feel like we're early on in this wave of podcasting. So no matter where you're at, even if you don't feel like a broadcaster or somebody who could ever speak in a public setting like that, I don't think you need to for podcasting. That's the beauty. I love working with people all across the spectrum there.
All right, thanks for joining me, Jon Goehring. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this episode. You're someone who can help me out a lot. I do this podcast, and I've written a book which I plan on creating an audiobook for, and all those things are up your alley. You do media in general, I would say, and more specifically, I know you do audiobooks, and you are kind of the producer of the Limitless Leadership podcast. So yeah, I had an episode with your co-host on that podcast, Jim Johnson. Anyone out there, there's a few episodes back, you can go find it. But yeah, thanks for coming on, Jon. I'm excited.
Oh man, Jake, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Anytime I can get, deep and technical with people, anytime they're even willing to listen to me,
Yeah,
I'm always excited to share.
Yeah, and so we've kind of talked about the plan for this episode over email, but for anyone watching, with all these episodes, this is the Quality Values podcast. I like to understand what are your values in the context of your story. With this episode specifically, I have some more technical things I want to understand, like specifically your audio editing process, what hardwares you use to record audio, what softwares you edit with. I want to kind of just build my knowledge in all those areas. So this episode is probably best for people who are seeking some sort of technical knowledge. But that being said, we'll start with the context. And as always, with every episode, I'll dig into your values as they come up. So let's start with the context. How did you start with the Limitless Leadership podcast? How did you meet Jim? And what was kind of your vision for that setting out?
Yeah, so I started my passion for media in college. And the first day I walked in to my college, small college here in upstate New York, didn't really know what I was going to do. Thought I wanted to do something in writing because I was recognizing the power of journalism. And then what I ended up doing was walking past a college radio station and just had that passing thought of, that'd be cool. I think I could do that. And so I walked in and the rest was history. I got involved literally that day and ended up on air doing a few different things, and then got an internship out of it and was able to work in local radio for a while. And that's where my journey really began, in radio in the traditional sense, like on that FM dial that you used to turn and listen to music or talk shows. That's what I was working in at first. And I still contract for those stations actually. But given some of the challenges that industry has faced, the rise of podcasting, for one thing, it's a great opportunity, but it's also a great challenge to the radio industry because it gives us so many other audio opportunities. What can we listen to in the car? Well, not just the FM radio anymore, but now we can put on a podcast like this great podcast. So there's a lot of different challenges that they were facing. Obviously Spotify and those types of things being other challenges, and the radio there was less of a demand, which led to less profit, which led me to go, you know what? I don't really want to get laid off. So I'm going to dive into my own business, which is what I do full time now, which is audio and video production for podcasters and authors who are looking to make books into audiobooks. And it's now a passion of mine that I love to do, to still dip my toes in the radio world, but get to use all those skills that I learned and put them to work in a different and valuable way.
Awesome. Yeah, I grew up listening to sports radio.
Yeah.
So yeah, ever since I was a kid, I've always had an appreciation for that. And now
Like,
it's just transformed. Now I listen to sports podcasts. But yeah,
like the Dan Patrick Show, those kinds of things. I love that.
and growing up, I grew up in Baltimore, so it was kind of the local radio for the Orioles and the Ravens a lot. My dad would always have those on in the car. We'd listen to the games and then listen to the talk when there weren't games. But
So cool.
I grew up loving the radio, and I think without even knowing it, I was kind of setting the foundation for starting this podcast and just kind of getting into this world myself. But I didn't know it at the time. So anyways, so you're in the radio world. You kind of see the tide shifting towards podcasts. Did you start your own podcast first, or were you a producer for other podcasts? What was the timing of you getting into podcasts and then the start of the Limitless Leadership podcast?
Actually, the Limitless Leadership Lounge started first. I had just left radio, and what I was doing is what all the other people who had left radio were doing, and that was voiceover. And I still do it. In fact, my brand is called Jon Goehring Voiceovers. Real creative, I know, but it is what I do. And that's kind of how things started is, hey, I talk on the radio. I think I could make some money talking for other people, whether it be for commercials, audiobooks, those types of things. And then I had known Coach Jim Johnson for a while, as he was had an inspirational story. I know an episode is also on your podcast with him if you want to hear more about that story. But he decided to reach out to me and ask if we would start a podcast together. I would obviously be doing the more technical side, the hosting, and he would be bringing on some people that he knows. So that's what we did. And it's been a really great opportunity. And through that, I've been able to network with some other people who are podcasters or looking to start podcasts, and using my experience, the Limitless Leadership Lounge kind of being a little bit of a test run, that experience that I got producing a podcast, understanding what it takes, and then learning that I can do it for other people too, who may want to start a podcast, but just don't have the time to do all of the production side of things. So I started in voiceover and decided to supplement that with podcast production, because it's kind of the next step, and everybody else is getting into voiceover. So there's not as much demand there as there is in the podcast side of things. And just the power of storytelling through podcasting, I found to be extremely rewarding. And that's just something that, even more than just talking all day, I really enjoy doing. So yeah, I'm excited for this conversation about podcasting, Jake. And I'm excited for you that you decided to dive into the podcasting world too, after listening to sports radio growing up, because there definitely is some overlap there.
Yeah, for sure. I'm loving it. I kind of started slow. I would do an episode every month or every couple months for the first few months, and I would get stuck on the editing. I'd have some problem I couldn't solve, and I'd get frustrated. But yeah, over time, the problems are easier and easier to solve, and I'm able to kind of pick up the pace. So I love it. I've met a lot of really cool people, and I've learned a lot of really cool things. So it's great. Thought synthesis. I really think humans learn best through conversations. At least I do.
Agreed.
So with your podcast production company, what is kind of the scope? So you've got your clients. What do they do? And then are they responsible for finding the guests? And then you do everything post recording. What's kind of, where's your sweet spot? Where's your expertise come in here?
Well, I've been really experimenting with this, and this is the fun part, is getting to work with people who they're in different places. Some of them, they understand kind of what it takes to start a podcast, and they just need to offload the editing. And that's where I come in, and I have a package for that. But now I've also started a package too, and I work with 2 podcasters on this so far, who they know they want a podcast. They know they want to create content, but they need some coaching and some help setting it up, even getting those guests and during those recording sessions. So I've started working with them too, to actually do the whole process with them. All they have to do is show up, basically. So that's been the 2 different tiers of 2 different packages that I do for podcast production, because I think there's room for all of us in podcasting. And some people say, well, I'm not an outgoing person. Podcasting might not be for me. I'm not an extrovert, so to speak. I don't have a great broadcasting radio voice. I'm like, you don't need to. Podcasting is just what you said, Jake. It's about conversations. We learn best through conversations. And I truly believe that the power of podcasting will continue. There are about 4 million podcasts out there right now, but only about 400,000 of them are active. And if you told me early on, during when the internet was young and websites were just starting to become a thing, that I could have a website, one of the first 400,000 websites, I would definitely take that. I feel the same way about podcasting. I feel that even though there are so many, and it seems like so many, how many websites are there now? Billions, right? And so if you could have one of the first podcasts, even one of the first 400,000, I still feel like we're early on in this wave of podcasting. So no matter where you're at, even if you don't feel like a broadcaster or somebody who could ever speak in a public setting like that, I don't think you need to for podcasting. That's the beauty. I love working with people all across the spectrum there.
Yeah, I found that too, and I'll say from my relatively limited experience, I think this is somewhere around episode 50 for me, but yeah, sometimes the conversations where I'm the most awkward end up yielding the most interesting tidbits, so it's not even about being like I don't have to be a beautiful host, I don't have to be perfect, super. Sometimes it's just about having the guest on and having the human back and forth, and magic happens. So, yeah, I can attest to everything you're saying. I've never been super confident in my voice or anything like that, but it works. I can still convey thoughts.
Yeah, and kudos to you for about 50. That's huge, because actually less than half of podcasts make it to 10 episodes. So the fact that you've made it to around 50 is great. And I wish I had the numbers right off the top of my head. What percentage actually makes it to 50 episodes, but so many people start podcasts and don't continue on. And so the fact that you're doing that is really fantastic.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I remember when I first started, my goal was 10 episodes. And I thought I was going to do that in about 2 weeks. I was like, I'll message people. They'll just jump right on. Our schedules will align perfectly. I'll figure out how to edit these things in 20 minutes each, and we'll get them out. But it took me several months to get to 10. A lot goes into it that you don't really think about, but it's all been worth it. How many episodes are you guys at? It's 200 or something, right?
Jeez, yeah, we just hit 200, so just over 200, yeah.
And that's in 5 years? I remember I talked to Jim. He said it was around COVID you guys started?
Yes, about 4. Yep, we actually just celebrated 4 years as a podcast. So, started kind of in the back end of COVID, the pandemic, early 2021, and then we've been doing it every week since. So just over 200 episodes now, just over 4 years.
That's awesome. That's my next goal, is get into the triple digits and grow from there. All right, I wanted to circle back to something you started kind of getting into, which is the future of podcasting. You're saying there's a lot of people, everyone and their mother, starting a podcast these days, but it's not a saturated market yet. Just like websites, it's got plenty of room for growth. I'm curious, what do you see as the future of podcasting? Do you think that this video format that I'll be releasing on YouTube and Spotify, do you think this will be the way we're still doing it in 10 years, or do you think it'll kind of morph the same way it used to be radio, now it's Spotify? How do you see things going? I know it's hard to project out, but just you're a little deeper in that.
Yeah, I think the video format is definitely the future. I also think that even on top of that, the biteable sound content, the chewable little pieces, I know you do some of that, Jake, is huge. If you're not doing that with your podcast right now, you're really missing an opportunity, because right now, whether it be those short form video content platforms like the TikToks and the YouTube shorts and even Instagram, those are really retraining our minds, I feel like, to seek out that short form content. But that doesn't mean there's not room for the longer form content. It just means that short form content, those sound bites, those quick value adding moments, is really what the future of podcasting is. And some people would rather watch 10 YouTube shorts that are 10 different points made in less than a minute than listen to a full 10-minute episode where the first 3 minutes are spent, hey, how are you? Oh, good. Weather's nice outside, right? So I think the future of podcasting is more getting right to the point. point and delivering as much value as possible. And yeah, you mentioned everybody seems to be starting a podcast, which is true. I think the value in that, though, is that there is opportunity to stand out and to use your podcast as not only just a run of the mill, okay, this is a podcast that is available up on Apple Podcasts or whatever, but it's an entire brand. You, Jake, have a logo for your podcast. That's brilliant. That's a great start, because that's a branding piece. Then making it part of your social media brand online, even making a website for it. There's so many different things that you can do with a podcast to make it so much more than a podcast and turn a podcast into a brand. And that way you aren't just one of the 4 million podcasts that are out there, but you're actually somebody who's separated themselves through the conversations you have. And the podcast isn't the thing. You're the thing. The podcast is just the medium through which you communicate the thing.
Yeah, I love it. And I've definitely found those short bits are probably the thing that's helped me grow the most so far, because it's free marketing. They blast it out. All the algorithms, every platform does a little differently, but yeah, if you make it in, it falls within those short requirements, it's free blast out. All you have to do is invest the time to edit. Do you do the short editing for the podcast you produce?
Yes, I do that. And I do that for all my clients, because I feel that's so important, and put together a folder with all those little short pieces for them, some vertical for those platforms, some horizontal. And I know that's such a pain for people to think, oh, geez, like I got to reformat this video for this different platform. It is actually important, though. I mean, horizontal videos just don't perform as well on TikTok and on YouTube Shorts. Whereas vertical videos, although now LinkedIn is making vertical, kind of putting an emphasis on vertical videos, so you do have an opportunity to put those up on LinkedIn now, as well, as people are often scrolling through their phones. But having that right format is huge. And that is something that I do because I think it's really powerful, and it's a lot of fun to produce, to be honest. I love taking those little biteable pieces and going, dang, that was 30 seconds. And that's some serious value that I can take home from that podcast without even checking out the whole thing.
Yeah, I've been editing those shorts too, and I found the same thing. I honestly learn more from editing than I do from the conversations. Just since right now, every question I ask, I have, my self-consciousness is like, oh, was that a good question? Is he getting what I'm asking? There's this whole kind of conversational debate. But when I'm editing, it's just the information that was said during the conversation. It allows me to really like stop and think about the interesting points, and sometimes I'm like, oh, that's a detail I missed in the live conversation. So
that's a good point.
Yeah. So what is your flow for editing that? For me personally, I make a vertical version of the whole video with captions for the whole thing, and I just start cutting little pieces out of it. Ideally, I can find little 30-second bits that don't require much editing, but more often than not, it ends up being like the first 2 sentences of this paragraph, the middle sentence of a paragraph a couple later, and a few more sentences later on that kind of round out the point. In a conversation, people kind of have roundabout ways, or you have to cut out the context specific moments to kind of get to a larger point that stands by itself in a soundbite. What is your process like? Do you manually edit it, or do you use any of these automated editing?
I do manual editing. I've tried these automated ones, and I think there's some value there, especially if you're crunched for time and you want to come out with something. I've found that they're still not quite there. Some of the AI isn't quite there for me as far as like finding those right moments. Sometimes it seems a little like it doesn't complete a thought, or it goes a little bit too long. I think it can be a good basis to start on and then edit from there. But what I've done is I've actually, what I do now for every episode is I make a transcript right off the bat. I do that using a service called Restream, which is a great podcasting service. And making that transcript is huge, because then from that transcript, I can write show notes, and I do use AI to help me with that. They don't write the entire notes for me, and certainly I add links and different things that the guests share, but putting that into an AI and then getting kind of a condensed version, saying, can we pull out some of the main ideas here, even though I remember from the conversation, but it just adds a fresh perspective. So finding that transcript is huge. And then reading through the transcript, kind of skimming it, going to places where, okay, yeah, that jogs my memory. I remember that was a great line that he or she said right there. And then pulling out those little pieces, then having them time stamped is a great way to just go in. Okay, I know exactly where that is. Now I can pull that video clip out. Because reading is just, I've tried it the manual way too, where I'm going through and watching the video, but reading is a little faster because you can just kind of skim through and find the right pieces without having to let it play in real time. So that's what I've found to be the effective workflow for me anyway, for picking out shorts from the episode, but I know there's multiple ways to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't mention, but I use a transcript too.
Okay.
On most of the time I edit in Riverside, which has good transcript based editing. Adobe I also have is a little more powerful, but it's just everything is set up automatically. But yeah, like what's interesting, what you do is you have the show notes before you do the editing. For me, I just do that after, before I do the YouTube descriptions. That's kind of, but I might actually steal that tip. Start making the show notes before I do the editing. I always kind of just go through, and whatever parts I remember having like an emotional reaction to during the conversation, those are kind of what I zone in on and try to find the clip there.
Interesting. Yeah. I think, I mean, either way, I don't think there's a wrong way to do it.
But your way is kind of both. You get the show notes and you get the memories, whereas I'm waiting until after I do all the editing to get the show notes. So I think it's an upgrade. Have you messed around with FFmpeg? Are you familiar with that? I just found that out.
I have not. No, I'm not familiar with that.
It's pretty cool. It's I use ChatGPT to make Python scripts, and there's this. This is not my thing. So anyone who knows Python will be probably laughing right now. But yeah, FFmpeg is like some sort of addition to the Python program. It's like its own app, and it's cool because you can make like what I have is the 9:16 vertical videos, right? And then what I like to do is YouTube or Instagram carousels where it's 4:5 ratio. And the way I make the big ones is that like the top section. So like when I make the clips of you in this conversation, you'll be on the top when you're talking, and and then I'll be the little section on the bottom. And so the whole top section is a 4:5 ratio, and then the bottom section is that extra that makes it the 9:16. So with the Python script, I can go into the folder where all the clips are, and it'll automatically reformat them from 9:16. It'll just crop the bottom to make them all 4:5. And there's like a renaming convention I also threw in there, but it's pretty cool because it's just one button, and then for like 10 videos, it'll take 10 minutes or so of just running in the background. But if I was to like pull all those videos, make the crop, and export them separately, that would take a lot more time. So it's cool. I'm just kind of adding in a little piece as I go. But
what's that called again?
It's FFmpeg.
FFmpeg. Cool. I really like that. There's so many great tools out there that I know we aren't even always using.
Yeah, you mentioned one that you record the podcast in, Restream. Is that like, this is Riverside? Is that a competitor to Riverside?
It is, yeah. It's very similar to Riverside, and I've used Riverside too. But yeah, Restream I like because of its transcript capabilities. Although you said that Riverside also has that too. So I think no matter what you're doing, I mean, I've recorded podcasts in Zoom too. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's adequate depending on what your goals are. But Riverside and Restream and platforms like this being more guided towards podcasting is huge. I mean, you get more bang for your buck if you're doing that versus just recording on any sort of meeting place. Yeah.
I'll have to check out Restream. It's a cool one. I like Riverside a lot, and it's gotten consistently better as I've used it. Like when I first started, they didn't have that transcript and stuff, but I'll check out Restream. I'm sure there's some advantages I want to, but all right. I want to shift gears a little bit to the actual audio editing. So after you recorded a podcast, what do you do to the audio exactly? First of all, what software do you use? Do you use Adobe?
I use Adobe. Yeah.
And then do you edit the audio in Premiere, or do you use one of the other ones like Audition or something like that?
I use Audition to edit the audio. Because that's kind of what I'm used to from my radio background. Now, since that doesn't edit the video that's definitely a challenge if you're looking to put up. That's why I usually just put up the raw video file, conversation only, because I feel like people resonate with raw conversations. Obviously, if you want to take out a chunk of it, I do that in Premiere, but normally I just do the main audio editing in Audition so that that's a tighter version of the podcast. So the first step is really going through and cutting out anything unwanted. I'll cut out long pauses or anytime somebody's dog was barking in the background, anything like that. Another thing that I guess I should mention is that one thing I do is I record separate tracks, and that's really key. And even if you're recording in Zoom, you can choose the option to record separate tracks. And why that's key is because if somebody's really loud versus the other person being really soft, it's easier to normalize what we call normalization of those levels, so that I'm not talking and I'm like blowing your ear out, and then Jake starts talking and you're like, you got to turn your volume up, right? You don't want to make your listener or viewer ride the volume level. So that's key. And then also, if a dog barks in the background of one track, eliminating that in one track while the other person is talking in the other track allows you to not disturb the podcast at all. So that's one thing that I do that I think is really beneficial. But yeah, Audition, really just starting with eliminating all those spots. Sometimes I'll eliminate the ums and the ahs and the you knows. Sometimes I'll leave those in. It just depends on how the conversation flows. Like that right there, I'd probably leave that in because it's naturally transitioning into the next statement. But if I were to stop and think and go, well, Jake, like those I would take out. And we do that more often than we realize, I feel like. And it's humbling listening back through your podcast and going, I can't believe how many times I said, but that is one thing that I start by, is just by taking that out. And then I have that full audio file that I know I want to put in as my final finished product.
And then what's your process with editing that audio after you've kind of gotten the full audio that you want? When it comes to the effects, do you have like a set effects template that you use where it's like a certain kind of compressor and EQ and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so actually one more thing I should say before I dive into that is then the last thing I do with the audio before I apply the effects is I take one or two snippets from that audio and I put it up front at the beginning of an episode, because I think especially in an audio format, it's so powerful to have that beginning 30 seconds or so being that guest saying something powerful or something the host said that was really powerful during that show, just as almost a built-in teaser. So you don't just dive into the welcome to my podcast, the intro starts, but it actually, before the intro, you have something powerful up front as kind of a hook or a tease. And then as far as audio effects go, I do something in Audition called dynamics processing, and that'll help level out. That's a type of compression that'll help level out some of the levels. And then also it does a couple of different effects, but it makes my voice anyway sound better. And typically I've found that really most voices resonate well with a dynamic processor. And there's certain settings you can play around with in Adobe Audition, but I do that first. And then I do an EQ as well, or it's called equalization. And that really, sometimes the generic settings that are on Audition are perfectly fine with most voices. They are, but some people have just different voices. EQ is like a spectrum, right? And Jake, you said have a little bit of a music background, and that EQ is like a spectrum. So finding that is just trial and error. There's no magic formula to finding what you're going to boost, whether it's the high end or low end or mids. But honestly, that's, if you're just a beginner starting out in a podcast, I wouldn't worry too much about the compression or the EQ as much. That's just a little bit of an extra audio tip for nerds like me who are a professional in this area. But whether or not the average person can really tell, I don't know. The main thing that you want to know as a DIY podcaster is having those levels even is definitely the number one key.
All right, this kind of gets into the values. When you're editing the audio, when do you know that it's done? Like is it when it sounds like the most natural? Is it when it sounds the clearest? Like what's like the end goal of editing the minutia of the audio?
Man, that's a great question. I've gotten to the point where eventually you just got to stop because you can listen back to it and find something else that you want to cut out. That's when, if I don't know whether it was done or not, what I will do is walk away from it or open up another project and work on something else and then come back to it. Because usually there's just a natural flow to a conversation that, because you don't want to over edit it either. And that's what I think so many new podcasters do right off the bat, because they want to do such a great job that they over edit every little anything that they don't like. They'll cut out all the silences. They'll cut out all the breath and mouth noises. And breathing is another great example of this. You could go through and spend several hours cutting out every single breath from a podcast. But I don't know about you, Jake, but I breathe, and so do you. And it's the natural human, like, you don't cut that out of conversations you have at the water cooler at work or with somebody you live with. You have to keep some things in podcasting. So when it's done, I really think it does. There is some just experience that you get the more you do it, to realize that, okay, that's enough. If I go more editing, if I cut out more, then it's just going to sound over processed, which I think is just as bad as under processed.
Gotcha. So there's kind of the two components. You like to walk away for, I would say, almost an emotional component, just to kind of distance yourself from the project, come back to it with fresh frame. So that's kind of one tool you use to define the end. But then it's when you come back and it sounds, I guess, is natural the right word? When it sounds natural. It doesn't sound over edited, and it doesn't, but it's still clear. You still you've clarified it to compensate for the flaws in electronic recording versus natural conversation. Is that a fair?
Yeah. If I would ask yourself this question, am I wasting anybody's time with this episode? And if the answer is yeah, because this really didn't need to be in here, then okay, it's not edited enough. But you get to the point where, no, this is a free-flowing conversation. This is something that sounds like I might have. You want to be relatable too. You want to talk like your audience would talk. Then that's at the point where I think, yeah, you're good to go. Don't overthink it more. Sometimes it is just move on, and next week, if you want to try to do better, if there's some things that you could have done better, just do better next week. And you can still put it out, and it is what it is. And hopefully somebody gets some value from it.
And then sticking with audio production, but shifting gears from podcast to audiobook.
Yes.
First, let's talk about the recording. When you're recording an audiobook, or maybe it's similar for voiceover or some of the other stuff you do, in your physical space with the setup, you've got your mic. I see you've got the noise canceling. What are the main factors you're trying to consider to control the quality at the time of recording?
That's a great question, because sometimes audio is so bad that it really can't be helped enough. And audiobooks is a great example of this, because in podcasting, you can put anything out there you want. And even if it's poor audio quality, it's just like social media. Like, it's open and free for anybody to participate in podcasting, just like you can post a TikTok video and your audio can be terrible. And it's not illegal, right? Like, you can't get in trouble for that. It might be a bad representation of your brand, but you can do it. Audiobooks, on the other hand, there are standards if you're going to try to monetize an audiobook. And Audible has really the industry standard of standards. And those are several different audio statistics that you want to keep in mind. And the first one and most important one, because it's really the only one that can't be undone through editing, is what they call a noise floor. And a noise floor is really however much sound your microphone is picking up without any other sound. So if we were just quiet for a second, that would be our noise floor. and it may be an air conditioner on, it may just be room tone. It's not going to be zero. We all think it's absolutely quiet in our room. And it might seem that way to the ear, but it's really got to be as quiet as possible, but it won't be totally quiet, right? So the noise floor that you need to hit for Audible standards, if you're putting out an audiobook, is negative 60 or lower decibels. So how you do that? Well, you're going to want to make sure you have a high quality microphone. Yes, that's important. But even more important than the right microphone, because I've heard a lot of audio from a good, expensive microphone that just doesn't sound up to standards because it's in the wrong room. So treating your room as best as you can. Sometimes it's, the sound pads that I have that are like the professional industry standard ones, but it doesn't even necessarily need to be that. The smaller the room, the better. If you can talk towards a corner of your room so your voice isn't just carrying off or bouncing off walls and creating an echo. You want to have a smaller room. And then if possible, I know this is not like conventional wisdom in any other area of life, but the more clutter, the better, actually. The more clothes you have hanging up, the more, if you record in a closet, that's a great place that a lot of people record for a do-it-yourself kind of audiobook. So bottom line is, yes, the microphone is very important, but all of the surrounding area is really important to achieve what you ultimately want to achieve, which is that low as possible noise floor.
How do you test your noise floor if after you have your recording? Do you upload it to Audition or whatever audio editor you use, and is there a way to see it in there?
Yes. So if you're recording an audiobook, you record right into whatever software that you want to edit in. That's usually the easiest. So some people have Audacity, that's a free version, and Audition is the one that I use, and it's kind of an industry standard too, but I know there's others that work well in the industry. And the best way to record a noise floor, simply hit record. Don't say anything. Let the room make the noise that it's making. Sometimes you realize that it's louder than you realize. And then there's a level meter. Sometimes you have to adjust it because sometimes it's not showing you that low of a level. Sometimes it's up in the 20 to 10 to 0 range. So you might need to zoom out and adjust that level meter so you're seeing exactly where it is. But you'll see those levels kind of bouncing a little bit like that. And you'll see where that peak is. That's where your noise floor is. So anything under negative 60 is perfectly adequate. And like I said, that's the only statistic that you can't really fix in editing, because removing background noise, it also influences your audio that you're recording. So it's really hard to isolate those things and remove that noise. Interesting.
Yeah, I've got this closet. It's full of all my clutter, like all my hiking stuff, and
that's perfect, man.
As we're talking, maybe I'll hang up some of the spare blankets I have and clutter it up even more, and then record. Since I'm working on this audiobook, and I haven't done one. So, what you mentioned the Audible recording standards, the main one being this negative 60 noise floor. Is there a list of other standards that they have? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so if I'm producing a book, A, where do I find these standards? And then B, you said I could accomplish all the other ones just with the editing? Okay.
Yes. And those standards are I know they're up on Audible or Audiobook Creation Exchange, or ACX is what it's called. I know they list those standards. I'm sure Google or ChatGPT can also pull them for you as well. And off the top of my head, I do know the others are editable. One of them is what we call RMS levels, which is basically just amplitude. Basically, how loud is your audiobook? And you can adjust that because you can raise or lower your audio gain in post-production. So you don't have to make sure you're nailing that right on while you're recording, because you can always adjust that a little bit. And they say between negative 23 and negative 18 is where they want that. And that's just so that you're not listening to one book on Audible and going to the next book, and then all of a sudden, again, sort of like our conversation we had about podcasting, you don't want your ears to be blown out by the next book. So they just want to keep some form of consistency. They also want, I believe it's a second of silence or of noise floor, so to speak, on the front end of each chapter, and then a second of silence on the back end too. So that's obviously something that you can just add in later on. There's also requirements about mono versus stereo, which you can always convert from one to the other later on. And then they have to be MP3 files, which is another thing that you can convert later on. So a lot of little meticulous standards that you can all achieve in the editing software, but sometimes that can be time consuming for somebody who, might just be starting or might not know a lot about audio. And they're like, what do all these things mean? And they go down a YouTube rabbit hole, and all that information is accessible, but it can be difficult and time consuming to get that all dialed in right.
Is it fair to say that best practice would be to try to hit all those standards in the recording as best as possible to minimize the distortion in the editing?
For the most part, I think the one standard that'd be tough to do that is the second of silence on the front and back, just because you don't really want to be, distracted with that standard in particular. I got to start at exactly this time. I think that's where the editing is powerful. The other one, potentially to try and get the loudness is good, because that will minimize the editing. Mono and stereo, the standard is that they all have to be the same. So you can't have a mono go into a stereo file and vice versa. So recording in that format may just be easiest, just so you don't have to do any conversions later. I would agree. So yeah, I think you're right, Jake. For the most part, if you know up front what standards need to be achieved, just by recording to those standards, that would be the easiest way. Sometimes it's easier said than done, but yeah, I think ideally you try to do that.
Yeah, shoot for that, and then make hopefully the minimum amount of adjustments to get in there.
Right.
All right, and then so with the recording, how do you go? Say someone hires you to record their audiobook. One thing I've noticed with myself is that on a day-to-day basis, my voice might change a little bit, my tone might change. Is that something you've experienced? Do you try to get into do you have a certain zone that you try to, the audiobook zone, where you know that you've got a consistent delivery, where you can come back and pick up the next day, the next week, and kind of carry it over just as if you were flipping pages to the next chapter? Yeah. What do you think? Like, what are the performance things that you think about in terms of recording an audiobook?
That's tough. And it's something that I've noticed over the years and gotten some good feedback from clients who say, I can kind of tell when one recording session ended and one began, because your voice is different. For one thing, to minimize that, what you can always do is always stop at a natural breaking point. So you have different files that are uploaded to Audible. They actually require that if you have different chapters in your book, each one is its own separate file. So that way, just like a playlist on Spotify, you can move to the next track while you're listening to it, because it's a different file. So one thing is always end in a natural breaking point. But the other thing I've started doing that's been really revolutionary for me is being more self-aware of when my voice is a certain way. And really what I've found is that it has to do with the time of day more than anything. And so I have my early morning voice, and I have my midday voice, kind of like this. And then I have my afternoon voice and my evening voice too, if I'm working that late. But what I've found is the most effective thing is to kind of match what voice I want with the time of day. And that means that if I'm working on a project that requires kind of a very soft and mellow and that kind of voice, we're talking about maybe a serious subject and it's a really difficult thing to talk about, then I will do that early in the morning. For some reason, my voice just does it. I don't understand why. And then I'll actually go through each Sunday before my week starts, and I will block off time on my calendar. And if I have an audiobook like that I'm in the middle of working on, I will estimate about how long I need to do it for this week and how long it'll take each day. And I'll block out 7 to 8:30 a.m. I'm recording that book. And that will not only make it so that it sounds as consistent as possible, but it also keeps me organized schedule wise too. And that has helped immensely, not only for me, but really in any business. That's so important.
Interesting. Yeah, I train martial arts and I'm a trainer. I lift weights and stuff. But I've noticed that the same thing you're talking about with vocal performance. I've noticed that with my physical performance. Like,
Really?
and yeah, in general, in the morning, I'm pretty good at endurance things.
Huh.
In the afternoon, that's when I would schedule my strength workouts, uh, and then in the evening, I feel like I have the most energy. So like the compound workouts, I do jujitsu now, but
Wow.
that's yeah, I don't know. It's for whatever reason, I like to go on a slow jog in the morning, heavy lift in the afternoon, and put it all together in the evening. But
Wow,
this,
I love that. That's fascinating, huh? Okay, I
yeah,
have to think about that too from a physical standpoint because I never really thought about that, but it makes sense now that you say it.
yeah, that's how I felt when you were describing the vocal performance. So interesting. It's funny how the human body works.
Yeah.
All right, so uh, and this is kind of you were mentioning that 1 second that you keep at the beginning of the
Yep.
recording. I'm curious, what are the other kind of formatting conventions? Obviously, that one's a rule by the Audible restrictions, but what are kind of the Jon Goehring guidelines that you stick to? Do you do like a 3 sentence transition in between chapters, or do you use like sound effects to signal? Um, I don't know. Sometimes I listen to audiobooks and they've got the note, like what is it, the editor's notes at the bottom, and it'll
Mm.
be like a bell. It'll go off the narrative, and then a bell, and it'll come back to the narrative. Um, do you? So yeah, what are the kind of conventions like just in between chapters, in between sections? Do you have like a certain uh, pause time that you build in consistently and stuff like that?
It really depends on the project. So I've worked on a project recently where the author really wanted some music, some soft music underneath the production. So what I ended up doing to signal the transition was the end of the narration wouldn't be the end of the chapter. There'd be a little bit of that trailing music behind and then a sound effect to really drive that home. So that's more of the higher end produced audiobooks. For the ones that are just voice, what I'll do is I'll end a chapter and then obviously you have that built in couple of seconds because there's one on the end and one in the beginning. And then I'll dive right in and say, chapter 2, and I'll list the name of the chapter. I will make that a slightly different EQ to just kind of pull that aside from the rest of it. It's a subtle difference that you may hear in your ear, but that kind of separates it. It kind of highlights that. It almost is like bolding a text or putting a highlighter over a text in a book. And if you have a little bit of that, or you could put it on a little bit of reverb or echo, just something to just separate it, not over the top, right? But just something really simple that maybe even some people don't quite notice, but it does signal, okay, next thing now, the bell is another good idea. I haven't used that, but I've heard that too, and it's not a bad idea. And then the other thing in the middle of the recordings, so sometimes I will record, maybe an example would be a book that I did recently. It was like a devotional book from a Christian author, and she was writing, her own narrative, but then she would go into like quoting the Bible. And then so she'd have like a Bible verse. I would read that and then I would put on a special effect on that because in the book it was italicized.
Yeah.
So when it's italicized, I want to communicate that too through the audiobook because people aren't looking at the pages, but you still want to communicate the fact that it's italicized. So I played around with some different things to do. I eventually just put on some reverb because that makes something feel bigger. It makes something feel more important. Think of, in a concert hall when you hear live music and how much reverb there is on that. It makes it feel more grandiose and bigger. And that's what I wanted to communicate through like, okay, this is like from the Bible. This is a big deal here. Now we'll go back to her narrative. So just little subtle cues like that. Really, with audio, effects are like a highlighter. It's like the same thing as writing with bold, italic, highlighting text, whatever it is, different fonts. You can do the same thing with audio in other subtle ways that can, instead of appeal to the human eye, you're appealing to the human ear. So yeah, that's a great question. I really get excited about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so just to spit it back at you, you kind of on an individual project level, you look at the formatting conventions of the book, whether it's new chapters, whether it's italicized sections, and you try to come up with consistent audio audio effects to distinguish those parts. And then you would use this. So for every italicized section, you would use the same exact audio effects throughout the whole project.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you have maybe a section, maybe at the bottom, there's a section of like bonus tip or something along those, like it's in a box, it's differently formatted. Then I'll add a little music bed underneath that. And so then it's a mental cue that, okay, when you hear the music bed, now this is something a little bit different, but it's kind of like a PS or in parentheses kind of thing.
Interesting. All right, a quick specific question about the music, and this is kind of getting into my own agenda more so than broadly applicable stuff, but I might as well use it while I got it. With the music, do you know how many decibel, minus how many decibels you would use for like soft background music, and then where do you source the audio from to where you have the rights to use it in an audiobook format?
So I do. Right off the bat, I'll always drop a music bed 15 decibels below its normal level. Sometimes I need to adjust that down to 20, up to 10, depending on the music track, because some music tracks are just naturally more loud than others, right? But normally that minus 15 I found to be that sweet spot of normally where it fits comfortably underneath a voice, but not overpowering it, but not totally disappearing either. And then as far as sourcing it, a couple of these are real simple ways. I mean, you could Google royalty-free music, but then oftentimes you are asked to sign up for things and, put in a credit card for a free trial and all that stuff. I just avoid that. And I use 3 services. One of them is called Pixabay. It's Pixabay, and it has royalty-free like images and stock video too. But I really use it for its music. It's got thousands of music beds, and it's sound effect library too. And then the other one is called Pexels, which is Pexels, which is another one that I use too for the same sort of thing. And then the third thing that I do is even simpler than that. And it's simply going to YouTube, and then I type in these keywords: royalty-free music bed, or royalty-free rock music bed, or soft rock, or inspirational music bed, any of those descriptor words that you want. And a lot of times YouTube will have a lot of these different options where it's got hours and hours of music that you can download, or you can actually play from YouTube and either record directly from, or use a YouTube to MP3 downloader, and then you can use that for free if it says royalty free, though. That's the key. You can't just take any song you want up on YouTube and legally use it. So those are the 3 services that I use.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've had a few videos taken down from YouTube for random. I would edit them on TikTok, and it doesn't matter. I've always been a little confused how to navigate that. All right, and then so I've got a pretty good idea for the editing process with the music. We've talked about the recording process. I wanted to swing back to the setup with the hardware. We were talking about it a little before. Super cardioid dynamic microphone. We're talking mostly about sort of broadcasting applications here. Audiobook, podcast. We've talked about radio a little bit. What are the best types of microphones? And then within that type, how do you find the right microphone for your application?
So there's 2 overall types. High level speaking, we're talking about something called a dynamic microphone versus something called a condenser microphone. Now, dynamic microphones are likely the way to go for probably most of your audience, because we're talking about podcasting mics, sometimes audiobook mics too, at least at the lower end. Dynamic mics are great because they're cheaper and they're more durable. They're usually $500 or less, and $500 is kind of that high end of a dynamic microphone. A condenser microphone picks up a lot more detail. So condenser mic is great in a studio, in a well-treated space. But if you pay a lot of money, like $500+ is usually what a condenser microphone will cost, and you think that because you paid a lot of money, it'll sound great. The problem is that can actually work against you sometimes with a condenser microphone, because now you're picking up more detail. And if your room isn't well treated, you're picking up more detail that you don't want, right? Oh boy, that air conditioner sounds really loud. Why? Yeah, because you got a really, really high quality mic. So I always recommend, especially if your room isn't like a professional studio, to go with a dynamic mic. With that said, one thing that you probably want for these purposes is something called a unidirectional mic. And there's unidirectional and there's bidirectional. Unidirectional, you're picking up noise just from one angle, right? You're picking up my voice, which is going right into this microphone. Omnidirectional, it's great for recording sound effects out in the field. You see those, down on the football field on the TV broadcasts, they have omnidirectional mics, but it's recording sound from all over the place. So that's usually less effective if you're just trying to record a voice. So those are the two first things that I would search for is unidirectional dynamic microphone. On top of that, you have two separate inputs. One is called an XLR and one is called a USB. Typically, XLRs are higher quality microphones because you need something called an interface between them. Typically, like a Scarlett interface is the best choice usually, or any other audio board that you have. But USB microphones can be okay too. It just depends from there on your price range. But again, those words that you really want to start by looking for are unidirectional and dynamic.
Real quick, just so I can remember, what do you know the physical difference between a condenser and a dynamic microphone? Do you know like what's happening behind the foam that records differently?
That is a great question. I wish I knew more about that. I do not know. I know it vibrates differently, which somehow that picks up more detail for the condenser. It's more sensitive somehow. Does that sound right to you? It sounds like you've learned this before too.
I've had this explained to me, and I couldn't before you start talking, I wouldn't have been able to explain the difference between dynamic and condenser, but it was familiar. I have heard it before. So I'm trying to put it together, but I don't. This is all.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what's happening. I just know that it does have something to do with the durability of the mic too, because like if I drop this, it would be okay. A condenser, it's like glass. Like don't touch a condenser. Maybe because it's also more expensive too, but also because of the delicacy within the mic.
I have a Sterling interface. XLR input here.
Yes.
My mic is turned up pretty high. Like it's turned up to about 3/4 of the max volume on my little manual knob, and I still get feedback sometimes that it's quiet. Do you know what's going on there? If you're having, and I've noticed it if I plug my other mic, I have this other mic here, which is just an old. I just got this on Craigslist a while back, but it's like a base level Shure microphone. If I plug the same mic on here, the same setup, it'll be louder. Does every mic have its own kind of bass level? And then if that is the case, how do you ensure that your final recording is like a normal level audio? Is there a certain like ultimate output that you're looking for? Do you want it to be 20 decibels or something like that?
That depends on what the purpose is. So that audiobook, you're looking for -23 to -18, which is quieter than most uses. Most uses of audio, you want a little bit higher. Like a podcast, you're probably looking to peak near -3. Like you're really trying to use up all the volume you can. That's interesting. So that microphone, it's a pretty high quality mic, right? It's a Shure. It
was like, I remember it costed like $200 or $250. That's the only value I know in the microphones is the price value.
And there's that. Yeah, that tells you a lot though. And with those microphones that cost a little bit more, like I would say in that range, anything less than $100, usually a USB mic in a lot of cases, great for meetings or, gamers love those. Because like it's not like the highest quality of sound, but it's better than just an internal microphone on your device. And it's solid, it's solid enough. But there's less customizability too with those. So usually the XLR mics start a little lower because the assumption is that you have like that board to go with it, whether it be a Scarlett or the board you use. Or I have the Rodecaster, which is, I know, a really popular one with podcasters too. And I love the flexibility that I have. And because of the sensitivity of the mic, you want to make sure that you have that room to go up. So yeah, to answer your question, really every mic is different. And that's why experimenting and playing around with it and trying to get it to that level that you want. Sometimes it takes some time, but it is, once you dial it in, you're pretty good to go.
Yeah, that's sweet. All right. So we've kind of covered the setup process, the recording process, the performance. I wanted to talk about the distribution. So starting with audiobooks, how do you publish an audiobook? Do you just go? I know how to publish a podcast. The way I do it is just go to Spotify for podcasters. That's tied in with an RSS feed. Yep. So once it's published on Spotify, it also gets published on all the other applications that I've connected through that RSS feed. Is it similar with Audible and audiobooks? Are there other platforms you need to worry about other than Amazon's Audible for publishing your audiobook?
And that's a great question. And it really depends on who you ask. There's a big debate in audiobooks right now on whether or not we want to focus solely on Audible or whether or not some of these other platforms are worth investing in. So there's two key things to know here. Number one is when you when you sell a book on Amazon, you have an option when you're making an audiobook, and that is to either exclusively sell the audiobook through Audible, or you can sell the audiobook through Audible and other platforms. You of course think, well, it's a no-brainer, sell it on as many platforms as you can, but Audible actually charges a little bit higher of a commission if you're not exclusive on that platform. So it's kind of a gamble when you're putting together an audiobook. Do you want to be exclusive on Audible and get a higher percentage of the profits from those sales? Or do you want to not be exclusive and syndicate to all these other platforms and potentially have more revenue sources? I use something for clients who choose to not be on exclusively on Audible called Authors Republic. And it's just like Spotify in the sense that it will syndicate your audiobook through its 30 plus different platforms that do sell audiobooks. And there's a bunch of them. I mean, Barnes and Noble has its own audiobook thing. YouTube and Spotify also have audiobooks. So you have the option to do that too, which is another good opportunity to syndicate yourself as far as possible. So that's the choice you have to make first, is do you want to be exclusive on Audible or not? If you are exclusive on Audible, obviously you upload through the same place as you're publishing the book, the Kindle Direct publishing place if you're self-publishing. If you're not, there's something called Audiobook Creation Exchange, or ACX, that you can upload those files through and get them approved and start selling. It does take like 30 to 60 days sometimes to get those files approved and that sales page up live. But then the other option would be to go through, it is similar to an RSS feed, like you said, for podcasting, to syndicate your audiobook.
I know Libby. Do you know Libby, the library audiobook platform?
Yes, that's another one too. Yeah.
So if I wanted to upload an audiobook to Audible, and I also wanted to upload to Libby, for example, I would have to keep it non-exclusive, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the key. And I know that's one of the platforms that like an Authors Republic, or I know there's other like syndicators, it's similar in podcasting to like Buzzsprout. You ever heard of that?
Or yeah.
One of those?
I haven't used it, but I was looking at it one time. I was looking through their website thinking about it.
Basically like a service that creates that RSS feed and then it syndicates it for you.
Do you know if you're releasing a free version on YouTube, can you stay exclusive, like selling it on Amazon if you're releasing it for free elsewhere?
Yes. The key is yes, just not profiting from other platforms is what Amazon's looking for. Yep.
Okay. Interesting. I'll have to think about the best strategy for me with those variables. And then how do you do the podcast? I went through my process real quick. Do you do the same thing? Do you use Spotify for podcasters, or do you use one of those, the Buzzsprout or Podbean or whatever the other ones are?
Yeah, I use something called Spreaker, which, it's the same thing as Buzzsprout, Podbean, all of those right there. And it's the same thing. So once you connect your podcast to what they create like an RSS feed for you. Basically, all an RSS feed is something that's consistent throughout all the platforms. So you plug that RSS feed into Apple Podcasts and boom, now it's going up for you. You can even plug it into a website and just have your episodes released on your website without having to manually add them each time you release an episode. So yeah, same sort of thing with podcasting. You kind of have your home base and then you have like all these affiliates, but to anybody else, it just looks like you're manually uploading it everywhere, even though you're not. That would be a ridiculous amount of effort.
I won't hold you to any specifics on this, but do you have a best guess for what % of the market share of audiobooks Audible currently holds?
Yeah, it's
got to be most of it, right?
It is high. It's like 75 to 80% is my guess anyway. Yeah, it's a good question because all these other platforms that are popping up and like everybody wants to dive into the audiobook game because it's huge, and Spotify is another one now you can listen to audiobooks on. So they're starting to take some share, but Audible's just been dominant throughout. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon, which is why I don't see a problem with the argument of going exclusive on Audible. I also see the other side of the argument too, because it's very limiting. You don't want to necessarily pigeon yourself into that one. So I see both sides of the argument, but yeah, I don't see Audible going away anytime soon. It definitely has the majority of the audiobook market share.
In the time that you've been doing audiobooks, has Audible become more or less prevalent, or has it just kind of been consistently dominant?
I think Audible has been consistent or increased in the amount of audiobooks that it sells. It has increased in profit, and audiobooks continue to be a bigger thing. But I think it's actually slightly decreased in market share just because early on when I started, Audible was everything. And maybe this was just my perception of it too, but it was everything. And now that we see this option of syndicating and all these other platforms popping up and trying to compete with Audible in the market, I've actually seen it kind of decrease its market share a little bit, but that it doesn't mean much just because of the increasing popularity of audiobooks. The statistics are amazing. In some industries like business books, for example, audiobooks are now even more popular than those physical book sales. So in a few industries, that's the case. Personal development, business, faith-based books, a lot of them audiobooks have exceeded, it's not there quite yet in fictional stories, but especially with nonfiction books, audiobooks are so huge because that's like busy professionals on the run. So Audible, yes, has increased as far as how many books they've sold, the availability of the books, and that's made the platform just even huger, but it's actually decreased the market share because of other new platforms coming in.
Gotcha. So it sounds like the audiobook market as a whole is growing, as is Audible, maybe not at quite the same rate as the rest of the market.
Exactly. That you said dominant. It in way fewer words and more eloquently than I did. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I think I got to figure out what I want to do with my book, but that's a lot to think about. All right, I want to shift gears. We kind of had the technical part of the conversation. I want to bring it back to kind of the values, the impact. If everything goes perfectly for you in your career, like what would be like the dream scenario? Is it that you're a narration star? Is it that you help people grow impactful podcasts that make a difference? Is it that you meet the most interesting possible people? Like what is in this for you? Obviously, you're making your living. You're paying your bills, and that's part of it. But why this industry specifically? Like, what drew you in when you started? You walked into that room on your college campus. What kept you in this whole time? What keeps you in as things change and you shift from the radio world to the podcast world? What's your like driving force in this industry?
It's the simple phrase that I use, and it's not unique to me, but it's kind of unique to the radio industry, is theater of the mind. I love that phrase because that's all we're doing here. It's podcasting. We're, maybe if you're watching on video, you can see us, but a lot of your audience probably just listening to us, whether they have the video up or not, right? It's theater of the mind. We're picturing two people having a conversation. In an audiobook, we're taking that information. We're picturing the author telling this information to us in a more personal way. So that's why this industry has been so fascinating to me, because I love watching people's visions of their content, whatever it is, come to life and then communicating it in different mediums. So maybe it's converting that text medium into a audio medium and giving that personal touch to that person. And then just seeing people's projects that they're so passionate about take on a different life form. So podcasters elevating their game and having an idea and a concept of a podcast, but not really sure how to get it out there. My assistance to them to get it out there, there's nothing more rewarding than watching the smiles on their faces saying, wow, now I can share my message with the world. I didn't know how to do this before. And same with the audiobook side of it too. I love narrating too. That is something that's a passion of mine. I love narrating. I always have. Goes back to the college radio days. But whatever it is, just bringing, I like to say my catchphrase really for my business is bring your brand to life through sound. And I believe it's possible that sound can be such a powerful medium, whether that be for podcasters or audiobooks or even in advertising.
That's awesome. It's several times in this conversation, you've kind of expressed audio in visual terms. I think humans are very visual creatures. It feels like a lifetime ago now, but at one point I was doing memory training, and it was all about these visualization techniques to convert rote information into kind of memorizable images, pictures. But yeah, I mean, just from this conversation alone, it seems like that might, like, your superpower is kind of like, what was that the term you used? The theater of the mind.
Oh, theater of the mind.
Yeah, you're kind of like you're playing into that theater of the mind with, and you've got the vocal. Like, even when you're talking about like the effects, the EQ and changing the audiobook effects for the italics versus the chapter versus the core text, you kind of kept using visual cues. But it's
yes.
Just outside looking in, that's a cool way to think of it. That's like the kind of, koan. It's like the Buddhist term.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a koan is like when a monk says something from an enlightened state of mind that kind of gives people in unenlightened states of mind insight into what it would be like to think. But from my beginner audio editing stage that I'm at right now, you're kind of giving me insight into what it's like to be deep into the audio editing, to have thought about it a lot and played with it a lot and progressed it a lot. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad it's been helpful, and so hopefully it's helpful to the audience in some way too. And no matter what stage they're at.
Yeah. Well, Jon, this was really awesome. I appreciate your help. Yeah, this is all very timely for me. I recorded an edit of the first edit of the audiobook. Did not sound great, so I'll get into my cluttered closet, clutter it up even more, get everything set up as best I can, and give it another rip with some of these things we've taken into account. And then also, there's plenty that I can incorporate with the editing on the podcast. So yeah, I really appreciate this. This was highly valuable information to me, especially at this place I'm at right now.
Well, thanks, Jake. And it's been fun talking with you. And I know your book, hopefully I'm looking forward to hearing it coming out on audio, and it's poetry, right? So
yeah,
sounds very interesting to me, and would love to hear what you come out with, and excited for that.
Yeah. I can send you a PDF now if you want to check it out, advanced copy. But if you do check it out, yeah, you can send me any feedback. It's all still tweak. I'm in the tweaking stage. But yeah, Jon, where can people find you if they're interested in your audiobook services, if they're interested in your podcasting services, or if they're interested in your podcast? And I'll include all the links in the description everywhere this video is posted. Where are the best places to find you?
JonathanGoehring.com. And it's Spelled funny. We were talking about this earlier, how my last name is spelled. Jonathan, JONATHAN GOEHRING. And if it's down in the show notes, that's great. You can just head on over there if you'd like. If you're interested in audio production, those types of things, there's a newsletter that I do that, if you're interested in signing up there, you can. And you get just one email every month about audio production tips to help hopefully improve as an audio producer. And that's the one way you can view all my samples and that kind of work too, and get in touch up at jonathangoehring.com. I'm active on LinkedIn too. That's my favorite platform socially to be on. So if you'd like to connect on LinkedIn and talk audio or podcasting or audiobooks, always happy to do that. And the Limitless Leadership Lounge podcast is definitely a passion project of ours. You can find that anywhere where podcasts are, wherever you found the Quality Values podcast too. So that's up on all those podcast platforms. So thank you, Jake. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to that and the opportunity to be on with you today.
Yeah, thank you, John. This was really awesome. I learned a ton.
Thanks, man.